Welcome everyone. Thank you for joining us for today's webinar, Is Cloud-Based Identity Governance Right for You? I'm Shay Mann and I will be your moderator today. For today's agenda, we're going to hear Orrstown Bank's case study about why they chose cloud-based identity governance, and then we'll end with some Q&A. Today's webinar is in listen-only mode, so if you have questions throughout the presentation, go ahead and submit those in the Q&A panel and we'll get to those at the end of the presentation. This session will be recorded and we'll email you a link to the recorded version tomorrow. Joining us today is Andrew Lynn, Senior Vice President and Chief Information Security Officer at Orrstown Bank, and Dave Hendricks, Senior Vice President and GM of Identity Now here at SailPoint. With that, Dave, I'll pass it over to you to get us started.
Great. Thanks, Shay. Welcome, everybody. Happy to have you here today. Hopefully this will be some time well spent for you. I think this is going to be a really good case study of Orrstown's kind of early adopter mentality with cloud-based identity governance. They've seen a lot of the advantages of a SaaS-based identity governance program, and Andrew can give you a great idea of why they chose to go with a SaaS-based program and some of the advantages they've seen. So I guess we'll start out. I'll let Andrew introduce himself, since you probably all would like to know kind of a little bit more about his history, both with the company and with the background in identity management. So Andrew, I'll let you introduce yourself, and then we'll head into the slides.
Thanks, Dave. Good morning, everyone. So I've been with Orrstown just a little over 3 years now. And came from a much larger organization after 15 years or so at JP Morgan Chase, which is where I actually got my first introduction to SailPoint, because one of the lines of business there was experimenting with the on-premise solution, but that's where I got introduced to SailPoint. Had a variety of roles at JPMC in the cyber and information security space. So it's been a bit of an interesting journey to go from a very large organization to a very small organization, but it does kind of flex your creative muscles a bit.
Fantastic. All right. Well, thanks for the intro. I'll tell everybody on the phone. Andrew would never say it himself, but he really has guided Orrstown Bank into a really well-run identity program. Must have been that background at the big financial services that gave him all the chops to do it. We're very proud of the results that we've seen. So with that, I'll turn it over to you, Andrew, and let you kind of walk everybody through your journey through the use of Identity Now and what you've done at Orrstown Bank. And just so for everybody on the phone, we'll probably pause as we go through the presentation. I'll ask a few questions here and there, and then as we get to the end, we'll prompt the audience for questions and answer a few of those as well. So over to you, Andrew.
Thanks, Dave. So the problem space is probably, for us, is probably not dramatically different from the problem space for most of you on the phone. And that problem space involves hundreds of applications. In our environment, most of those applications we would consider high risk. As you can imagine, most of them execute a business process. We're in the business of banking, so quite a few of them allow the movement of money or allow access to significant amount of sensitive information. And the other challenging part is across all of these applications, at least in the community banking space, we don't develop any of these apps ourselves. We go out and we buy them from providers who kind of niche providers in this space. But of course, that means that every one of these applications comes with its own identity model, it comes with its own access model, it comes with its own username and password or authentication model. So, the vast diversity of applications have, presented challenges for us. And really those challenges fall into four major categories. The first is that when I came here, we often found that we had people that just had way more access than they needed to have. And it was because we didn't have kind of global visibility into who had access to what. It was easy to just say, hey, whatever that guy has, that's what I need. Give me access to that. And what it results in is people having more than they need. So that obviously increases the likelihood of a breach. Certainly increases the impact of a breach if you've got a foothold and you can take advantage of excessive access. You can certainly increase the impact. And it's constant responding to audits and regulatory reviews where they're generating findings that people have too much access. You spend a lot of time trying to go back and figure out where those things are and clean them up. The second major challenge is, yeah.
Hey, Andrew, a quick question for you, because I know a lot of people on the phone are currently using other identity management tools. What did Orrstown use prior to bringing in Identity Now? Was it mostly a manual approach, or did you use an on-prem solution that was available in the market?
No, it was all manual. It was, for all intents and purposes, it was pen and paper and spreadsheets.
Okay, great.
Yeah, so that answer actually dovetails quite nicely into the second major challenge, which is that we were spending a huge amount of time doing very large-scale access certifications manually. Before I got here, my predecessor would actually take printouts and go sit at people's desk and go through line by line and kind of check them off with a pen, and then have that person sign the paper at the bottom, and then there's a giant filing cabinet where all that stuff is kept. And as you can imagine, that just it takes a significant amount of time and energy to complete those type of regulatory reviews. Often, in addition to that, there really wasn't any business-friendly descriptions of what the entitlements mean. So when my predecessor would go to sit at someone's desk and say, "You've got access to server X9405," and the certifier would say, "I have no idea what that is, but the people can do their job, so it must be okay," and you end up rubber stamping some access just because there's a lack of descriptive terms. And then finally, users have to remember dozens of passwords, which means likely they're going to write them down, or they're going to use the same password for every application, which if any of you are in the security domain, we all know that is not good practice. If it's compromised one place in a low-risk system and it's the same one as for a high-risk system, you've essentially compromised both. And we got a lot of calls to the help desk for people asking to have their password reset because there's just too many to remember. So those are really, if I boil it down, those were the four major challenges that we were trying to solve.
So Andrew, when you got to Orrstown, would you say that the organization was kind of had the belief in Identity Now, or did you have to convince them, in identity management, or did you have to convince them that this was a real problem? Was it a receptive audience, or did you have to go into selling mode to make sure that they focused on these things?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think with any implementation like this, especially in a smaller organization, you do have to go into selling mode. So I was able to construct a business case that predicted some of the savings in time and energy and the improvements in quality as far as certifications go and knowing who has access to what so that we can prove to, we're in a heavily regulated business. So if we can, any place that you can show that you're going to improve the interaction with and results of the assessment from the regulators, those are things that are good selling points.
Great, thanks.
So for all of those reasons, the four challenges and the fact that, we know we needed an identity governance solution, we chose to go to the cloud. And we're actually Orrstown Bank is a cloud-first organization. And, that may sound strange to some of you if you're in the financial services industry. And I'll talk about in the next slide some of the reasons why generally we have that cloud-first strategy. But identity governance in the cloud was a logical progression or extension of our overall cloud-first strategy. We're not trying to be in the business of running a data center. We'd rather be in the business of solving the financial needs of our customers and building strong relationships. And so we'll let the folks who are good at running data centers actually do that job. In addition, deploying to the cloud is faster time to deploy. We don't have to procure servers or even spin up virtual servers. We don't have to install things, locally and figure out how we're going to monitor and maintain them. So it is significantly faster, which frees our IT resources, which are limited to focus on revenue-generating projects. Additionally, we found that, I know SailPoint has an on-premise solution, and it is full-featured. But weren't that complicated. We didn't need every bell and whistle. So the SaaS solution in Identity Now provided really the right mix of features and cost. So I'm really only paying for what features I need, and I don't have to pay for 1,000 bells and whistles that I will likely never use. And then finally, the benefit of any cloud provider is the elasticity. If we grow significantly and instead of 400 users, all of a sudden I have 4,000 users, I don't have to worry about deploying 20 more servers and load balancing and all of the technology overhead that goes along with that. Identity now is built to grow with me, so we kind of get that elasticity inherently. So those are really the four reasons why we've chosen that we want to put identity governance. We know we need. Let's put it in the cloud for those reasons.
So, Andrew, what was the biggest resistance that you saw when you first started going through this process internally at Orrstown?
Yeah, so the biggest resistance for any community bank is going to be cost. I think in today's business world in general, everyone is very cost conscious. So the ability to show that an investment in an identity governance solution, whether on-prem or in the cloud, will result in the savings of cost, even though I'm going to have to spend money to save money. That's really the business case that we were able to develop and publish and get our folks to buy into.
Great.
So some of the questions that I usually get when I say, hey, we're a cloud-first organization and we're doing identity governance in the cloud, the first question I usually get is, wow, okay, is the cloud really safe? And I get it a lot from financial services organizations. And my answer generally comes in three forms. The first is that I couldn't possibly make the same investment in cybersecurity that, let's just say, Amazon, for example, can make. They spend millions and millions of dollars protecting their infrastructure and have tools that are vastly more complicated and effective than ones that I could afford. So kind of like running a data center is not my core competency. I would rather let someone who's good at it do it. Investing millions of dollars in cybersecurity is not our core competency either, when others can do it much better. And SailPoint is one of those providers that it's their core business. They can invest in that and run it better than I can. So I actually think in many instances, running things in the cloud makes it more secure. Certainly, however, not all cloud providers are created equal. So what it means is that your vendor management program is going to have to be enhanced because you are moving things out into someone else's control. So you want to make sure that they are protecting that information the same way or better than you would. There are actually some resources out there that will help you. If you're in the financial service industry, Cloud Security Alliance was an alliance created by a number of big banks, JP Morgan Chase included, to really define what cloud providers should be offering in the way of cybersecurity, information security, data confidentiality, et cetera. And you can actually consult that site and that alliance to get a list of things that you can ask your cloud provider to make sure that they are doing. The Cloud Security Alliance also offers, they have already pre-published a number of cloud service providers that have gone through the Cloud Security Alliance assessment, and the results of that assessment are published out there. It makes it real easy it makes it a lot easier for organizations like mine to decide whether the cloud service provider we're about to invest in has the right controls and would protect information the same way we would. So you kind of combine those things together that, let people do what they're good at, and then we as a bank can do what we're good at. But we got to make sure that our vendor management program is strong and we use resources like the Cloud Security Alliance. All those things together, I think, really do make the cloud safe and certainly cost effective.
Yeah, thanks, Andrew. One of the things we haven't publicized this yet, but one of the things we're in the process of is we're finishing up both an ISO and SOC 2 certification, which is kind of another layer. That's something that you should probably look for with any SaaS provider, that they've gone through some sort of external certification of their environment and their process so that you have assurance that they're doing things the right way. We certainly see that, it's easy to start a SaaS company. It's just really hard to do it right. So I really like the idea that vendor management idea. You should always have some sort of external third party evaluate whether or not the company is doing it the right way.
Yeah, totally agree. In fact, one of the requirements that the Cloud and Security Alliance recommends is that you consume an audit report like that. So I think we've gone through kind of the problem space and why we decided we needed an identity governance solution. We also went through a bit on why we've decided to put that governance solution in the cloud. So what I'd like to share with you now is some of the results of that. We have used the entitlements vault, which is what I call Identity Now's store of all the entitlements that we load into that system. It's kind of a one-stop shop for who has access to what across all of our applications. It makes it easy to satisfy requests for people who are joining the company. You can go out and consult that database for users who have a similar job title and really model roles off of that data. It also allows you to more easily take away access when someone leaves the company, because it's not a guessing game what they had access to. You can go to the entitlements vault and see everything to which they had access, and then certainly transfer requests. It's kind of a combination of a joiner and a leaver, where someone's changing jobs, some access needs to go away, and new access needs to be provisioned. You've got that one single database where you can view all of that together. What this also resulted in is, because we're better able to satisfy leavers in particular, the number of audit findings that we've gotten has gone down dramatically, where we are no longer getting, it happens every once in a while, people are human, some things get missed. It happens every once in a while, but very rarely do we get an audit finding for someone who has left the company and still retains the access that they used to have. I think I mentioned that, single sign-on. We're also using password management, which gives the users the ability to reset at least their Active Directory password. Most of the applications we consume are web-based, and they have their own "I forgot my password" link. But the Active Directory, unless you're in Azure Active Directory, those capabilities didn't exist for us. So we're using Identity Now to allow people to self-service reset their passwords. And we've seen a measurable reduction in calls to the help desk, just for people who said, hey, I forgot to change my password, it expired over the weekend, now I can't log in this morning. They have a mechanism that they can just take care of that themselves. Additionally, since we've eliminated the pen and paper mechanism of doing access certifications, we've saved almost a full FTE's person worth of time every year, and that comes in the form of the person who was walking around with the pen and paper to every manager no longer has to do that job. The managers who were having to sit and pour through the paper line by line and try to guess and ask a million questions about what this thing means now have a significantly more streamlined process. So we've saved close to a full FTE that we can use for other revenue generating projects.
And Andrew, when you kind of pitch the results internally at Orrstown, what's the biggest impact that you're pitching? Is it mostly the kind of cost savings, efficiency side, or is it more security and risk abatement? Which of those is kind of the big player internally in terms of how you sell a continuing investment in the program?
Yeah, so I can tell you what our experience was, and mileage may vary depending on how risk-averse your organization is. But I know that cost savings carries a heavier weight with those who hold the checkbook. So if I can show cost savings is the majority of the business case, and oh, by the way, our security is going to be much better too, and that will make our regulators happy. That was kind of the balance that I struck to get things through here. Other organizations may be different, where you could do more of a security play over a cost play. It all kind of depends on your investment strategy and your risk appetite.
Yeah, we've had a number of customers who have kind of used the I'm saving enough money to pay for this entire program approach, right? So that it's a net cost neutral to the company. And so if you're cost neutral and you become much better, your risk posture improves and you have greater security, that's kind of the nirvana that you're looking for.
Yeah, that's exactly right, and that's pretty much the way that we approached it.
Great,
So,
thanks.
so we did have some challenges along the way, and I'm happy to share them just in case someone else is looking to the same environment for the same implementation, that maybe things that you should plan for or at least take into account. So we have, as I mentioned before, most of our applications are vendor-developed applications that we buy either off the shelf or from niche providers. And what that means is that they haven't all come with the ability for us to directly access the back-end database. Most of them do not have an API. Few of them have automatically scheduled reporting capabilities. And so integrating in an automated fashion into Identity Now can be a challenge in that environment. It involves a lot of calls to each vendor to encourage them to create, automated feeds. We're trying as much as possible to not have to have humans in between where the data comes from and ultimately into the entitlements vault in Identity Now. That kind of defeats the purpose of the business case that says, hey, we can save cost if we've got to have people touching every file that comes in. But the consequence of that decision was that we did a lot of whack-a-mole between vendors trying to convince them to give us automated feeds, some of which will do it for free and some of which won't. But that was one of the challenges. We've also had a challenge in just making functionality like single sign-on and password management available. Didn't seem to be enough. For some, at least in our experience, users who are used to calling the service desk to get their password reset, they like the human touch, or it's uncomfortable to try something different. There was a decent amount of advertisement, awareness, and education to make sure that we made this investment in things like single sign-on and password management. If people aren't using it, then it was kind of a waste of money. I think the good news is that once people got the message and they tried it the first time, they realized how convenient it is, and they really liked it. But it did take quite a bit of constantly keeping that stuff in front of users until the culture and kind of the traditional behavior starts to change, where people embrace more of a self-service model.
Andrew, how did you go about doing that internally at Orrstown? We get this question from customers. I would probably say it's almost the most frequent question we get, which is, how do we manage a communications program internally, and in particular when you're going from a manual approach to an automated approach, to kind of sell it internally to get adoption? How did you approach it? Did you do newsletters? Were there big meetings? Did you have the CEO send something out? What approach worked best?
All of the above. We used every avenue that was available. So I posted updates on the intranet about new features that had become available or ways to use the tool to help you work smarter and faster. I used email both from me and from direct managers and from the senior executives. We have kind of an internal social media a social network, and I used postings there to communicate what's new, what's changed. Hey, this single sign-on now has these 5 apps that are published out there. I went to staff meetings. So there was a decent investment in my time just communicating via every vehicle possible to make sure that people knew what was available to them. The other challenge that we experienced is, and it's not going to be any different for any identity governance solution, is that there is no substitute for the time that it takes to define your entitlements in business-friendly terms. Unless your applications come out of the box with entitlements that are very easy to understand and or built-in descriptions that someone has already entered, there's no getting around the investment in time that someone is going to have to take to manually go in for every one of those entitlements and make sure that there is a business-friendly description that when it ends up in front of someone for certification, they have some context to know what this thing means and whether it's appropriate or not. I'll be honest that we have not gotten through at Orrstown, even in the couple of years that we've done this, defining business-friendly terms for all of our entitlements. We've gotten it for quite a few, at least the ones that generate the most questions, because maybe the entitlement name itself is not intuitive. There's a decent amount of time that it takes to go through those things.
Andrew, one of the questions we get a lot of times as people are, especially organizations that are going from an on-prem model to a SaaS model, is what's the difference in deployment time? Maybe you could give an idea of what your kind of phased approach looked like. What was the timing of phase one, phase two? What did you roll out? Just so people have a mental model of what those differences might be.
Yeah, it's a great question. We actually started with what we considered to be, for all intents, for lack of a better descriptive word, a proof of concept. So we decided that the first things that we were going to tackle were a finite list of our most important and most complicated applications. And there were, I think, 5 of those on that list. And we gave ourselves about 8 weeks worth of time to see if we could get those most complicated systems onboarded for certification, so get the entitlements into the entitlements vault, and for single sign-on, and where applicable for password management. And the thought being behind that is if we can get these 5 most complicated applications, then there's no reason we can't onboard the other 125 that are not quite as complicated. If we can prove that the access model inside Identity Now is extensible enough to accommodate these complicated access models, then we have confidence that we can do it lots of other places. The good news is that in that first 8 weeks, not only did we onboard all 5 of those applications, we also got almost 50 other applications built for single sign-on. The interesting thing is that once you build a single sign-on for one application, especially whether it's password replay or you're using SAML-based authentication, once you do it once, it's almost a rinse and repeat. Yeah, the field names change. Yeah, the URLs probably change, but the process to create it is almost exactly the same. So you can deploy lots of single sign-on applications fairly quickly. So after the first 8 weeks, when we got to kind of the finish of this proof of concept, and yeah, we're now automatically ingesting all entitlements for those 5 applications. We've got those 5 plus 45 others doing single sign-on, and we've got Active Directory working under password management. Then it became less of a project and more of a run the engine effort to onboard more stuff. Starting obviously with the highest risk assets first. And over the course of probably the next, I would say 3 to 4 months, we finished onboarding all of our high-risk applications, which was almost 40, for entitlements, vaulting, and certification, and we had over 100 applications in single sign-on. And then, as new things come up and we continue to expand into medium risk and so on, kind of opportunistically since then.
Great, thanks.
So we did learn a couple of lessons, I think, either through that proof of concept or since in just working with the platform over time. And the first is that, obviously the quality of data that you're going to feed into Identity Now has a dramatic impact on the quality of the certifications and the things that you can use Identity Now for. For example, if you've got user ID naming conventions that are different for every application, doing a correlation of that entitlement to a human or to an identity becomes much more difficult. So if there is an opportunity to, if you're thinking about doing an automated identity governance solution, if you can standardize on the way that you define user IDs, and make it an attribute that's easily correlated to an identity, whether it's an email address or it's something else that comes from your identity store, certainly makes your life a lot easier when having to do transforms and things when the data comes in. you'll probably be faced with a lot of potential sources for your identity. In our case, we've got our human resource database, and we had Active Directory, both viable candidates for an identity source because they both generally contain the same information, and in some respects, one feeds the other and vice versa. So we actually ended up going with the human resource feed, figuring that should really be the system of record. That if there is an official job title or an official location of work, it should be noted in the HR store. So you'll have some choices on which to pick. That was obviously not the most convenient because Active Directory is fairly easy to connect to, and we could have made that our identity source. But we opted for one where we would have to convince the provider of that database to give us automatic feeds. I think that we learned that we were happy that, I will say it this way, that we had at least one stakeholder that was hands-on through the whole process. I know SailPoint offers professional services, and there are partners of SailPoint that will essentially do this deployment for you and configure it. But at some point in time, unless you plan to keep them on permanently, they're going to walk away and you're going to be left with having to manage and maintain it. So having someone closely involved in all of the deployments will serve you well. Then once that those professional services have been exhausted and you're left trying to grow it or manage it on your own, you'll have at least one person who understands how the thing works. How the thing works from a book can be much different than how the thing works when you actually have your hands on it and you type the letters and you click the buttons and you navigate through the screens. If your organization is like ours, where we've got a lot of different applications coming from a lot of different vendors, the access model that those applications use is going to be different. So the attributes and the way the entitlements are defined will be different for every one of those. We invested in a data transformation solution that will allow us to, again, with the goal being that we don't want humans to have to be between where the data is coming from and where it's going to. We can create transformations that will take fields from one application source and make them look like every other application source. So you really kind of standardize the way data is coming into identity now, which I think streamlines our ability to not have entitlements that don't match up to identities, and we have to manually figure out what those are. And it also kind of streamlines the way that entitlements are grouped together, so that when people do certification, the pattern of how these things appear looks and feels similar. I think that's it.
So Andrew, I'll give you one last question, and then we can kind of open it up to the questions that have come in over the webinar. What's next? What's the big thing for 2018 on your plan, on your program?
Yeah, two things actually for us. The first is, now that we've gotten to kind of a critical mass where we've got enough of our applications loading their entitlements into the entitlements vault, we can really start to model roles. So we can do comparisons of what entitlements does everyone with the same job title, what entitlements do they have? And if 9 of them all have the same thing and one of them has something that's dramatically different, there's an opportunity there to either make them all consistent and give them the extra things, or decide that, hey, those extra things are probably not appropriate for that job title. Again, trying to promote the principle of least privilege. So we can do that now across all of our job titles. And it's really been beneficial to help us start to model roles that not only when somebody joins the company in a job title, we don't have to, which I'm never a big fan of, model their access after another user. We can actually consult the database of what access is common for that role, and then create a definitive, this is the access that role gets. So we're probably, 2/3 of the way through the analysis of all of our job titles with the goal of really having solid roles The other thing that we are considering is the Identity AI product, which we were one of the pilot users, kind of as an extension of that role modeling. The artificial intelligence that you guys are now piloting, I think gives us the capability to automatically build insights into the way users are granted access and how people actually use that access. Again, to find opportunities to trim things that aren't needed or make things more consistent across job titles. And then the final thing that we're considering is the access request module for SailPoint. Again, we're probably not going to be a near-term customer of provisioning, only because in the environment we live, where I've got applications from 100 different vendors, and none of them give me direct database access, and none of them have APIs, that doing automated provisioning, it gets loses some of its value for us. For others, it probably won't. But I think what is valuable is the access request model, where historically we've had people asking for access via the regular ticketing system. It can work that way. It certainly wasn't designed for that purpose, and we've kind of reached the boundaries of the way that you can build workflows in that system, because we want to have some more enhanced workflows to make sure that access that's being requested is being appropriately reviewed and vetted and approved. So we will likely invest in the access request module as well, because I think SailPoint's Identity now provides a fairly sophisticated capabilities in the form of workflows for approvals, and then ultimately generate tickets where somebody's got to actually click the buttons and provision access.
Great. Thanks, Andrew. That's a great vision going forward. We talk to customers all the time about kind of completing the puzzle and making sure their program kind of hits all the various aspects of identity management. Sounds like you're well on your way to doing that. So I know we've had a few questions come in. I'm going to turn it back over to Shay now, and she's going to read off. I know we've had at least a handful that she can ask you.
Great. Thanks, Dave. All right. So, Andrew, this will be a question for you. Was your cloud identity governance project a migration or adapted after you moved applications from on-premise to the cloud?
So we had already established the cloud-first strategy for IT, and we had already migrated a number of applications out to the cloud. And before I even joined, and before we started even considering identity governance in the cloud. So that kind of cloud-first strategy was fairly well established when we considered identity governance.
Great, thank you. Okay, another question. So how big is Orrstown Bank in regard to number of employees?
We are about 400 employees.
Excellent.
Do you expect that to increase in the near future, or do you think you'll stay at about that size for a while?
No, I actually expect it to. We're in a rapid growth mode right now, where if we would like to be 3, 4, 5 times the size we are now in a fairly short period of time. Whether that's an asset size, whether that probably doesn't mean that we're going to have 3, 4, or 5 times the number of employees, but easily I could see double the or more the number of employees in the next 3 to 5 years.
That's great. Yeah, it's interesting because we've seen. I think we anticipated that most of our customers would be in kind of the mid-market, kind of the 400 or 500 up to maybe 10,000 early on, but we've seen a wide range of customers that have gone cloud first. We've got customers all the way from your size, Andrew, in the hundreds, all the way up to we've got a couple of customers that have 500,000 or more. So it's I think our anticipation was that this would be a slow-moving market. It seems like it's actually moved quite a bit faster than we anticipated. So you were at the front of it, but it's following you very quickly.
Well, great. Okay, so that's all the time we have for questions today. Everyone on the call, thank you for joining us. Thank you, Andrew, for your time today. Dave, thanks for joining us as well. Everyone have a great rest of your day.
Thank you.